when you come up front to share your screen, you'll also want to just click on whoever you are down here so that it's showing you. All right, make sense? So you've got to change who's showing on my computer for you to be broadcast on the screen. All right?
What?
You will, when it's your turn to present, you will click to share your screen, and then you'll click on the thumbnail for yourself on my computer so that
Okay.
so that you are the one who's showing up here. Everybody get that? Right? It's a two-step. You come up, you click to present your screen.
I see.
Perfect, right? And you're the one who's selected here right now from my computer. So whoever's going next, Claire, Shelby, Nicole, you'll just select, you'll click on your own computer to present, and you'll select yourself down here so that yours is the one that is showing up on the screen. Great. All right, well, with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to the group that did TEI encoding of 2 of Thoreau's journal entries.
Not standing in front of the projector.
So set yourself up.
Well, I don't want to stand in front of it.
No, that's true. You're right. Let's just see if we can get this a little bit closer to you.
Try to give you a little bit more room. For the right one?
It'll
Sorry,
come back.
sorry about that.
There it is. Not a problem. All right. Get the pen back.
Balance on either side. This is chair. No, absolutely not. I sit on the table. Sorry. Fuck up the presentation.
So our project was encoding Thoreau. So the purpose of our project was that we wanted to acquire a deeper understanding of CI, which is the markup language most commonly used for scholarly digital editing. So this was kind of briefly covered in class, but we wanted to kind of have a deeper understanding of this. So we kind of gathered research and information to encode 2 of Thoreau's journal entries. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to kind of add a little bit more dimension and complexity to the journal entries. So I kind of want to talk about a little bit about how this differentiates from HTML. So when I talk about text encoding, what it essentially is codes to text, which will add like a little bit like a more detailed description of the text itself. So when you text encode, it automatically assumes that you are already typing up that text manually by using like an OCR program, which is like kind of like Adobe or like a PDF. So when you add the text, you will kind of want to add like more details to the text. So you can add like publications, like the author, locations, and what else? So it's very similar to HTML in the sense that it kind of like the headers, the way that the headers will work is kind of similar to TEI. I guess the main difference though is that the tags have a concrete, very well detailed and documented meaning. So like for an example, like our project, we could have just like manually written out our texts, but it wouldn't have given us the ability to actually create detailed data on our encoding.
Okay, so in terms of tasks, we first all had some decisions to make, and then once we found our focus, we split up into 2 teams, the research team and the TEI team, and then from there we continued to divvy up the tasks. So this is what our Trello board looked like. So as you can see on the far right, there was a lot of decision making that went into it. And then during the doing side, you could see that there was a lot of very different things we had to do, including like the labeling, the actual TEI encoding in the oxygen, and adding the tags manually before we did the oxygen. There was a lot of different things we had to do. So specifically, we took journal entries first from this book that we all got. We actually took ones that were at the very end that were about a kitten. And then we decided our focus, which we definitely had some trouble getting to. After that, a few of us transcribed the entries into Google Docs. We marked it up and annotated it with all the different pronouns and nouns, and then we gave it over to the TEI team to encode it and put it into Oxygen and make the actual TEI format. Okay, so then our team. So personally, what I contributed was I did a lot of the markup and annotating in Google Docs with all the color coding and contributed to some of the research.
I typed up the initial journal entries that we'll be using, also annotated and did research, and created the PowerPoint and a Google map that we'll be showing later on.
I took all of the work that our wonderful team did and actually transcribed it into Oxygen, firstly using Atom and creating the actual document that we ended up with.
So before we put everything into Oxygen, we had to basically figure out, after they took all the words and color coded before we put into Oxygen, you need to kind of make a label for all of them, and you have to tag all the correct words the proper way that they'd be structured in the actual text. So we'll show that later, kind of what that would look like. And then so that Amelia's would have taken that and put it in Oxygen to actually be able to have the coding frame.
And I just had to review the files and make sure if I found something that didn't match up with Emilio, but Emilio was spot on, didn't really find anything. And then I constructed our blog post.
All right, so we're going to go a little bit more into TDI. So as we mentioned earlier, most of our project worked with TDI code. So what we did is like we said, we took the journal entries and we had to take different words in the journal entry and kind of elaborate on them a little more and give a little more textual evidence to what they actually meant, what we actually was talking about. A lot of the TDI information we got was from our actual lesson in class, as well as doing our own kind of like research / kind of teaching ourselves more of the code through a TDI website. So TDI stands for Text Encoding Initiative. It's kind of like, this is the definition we kind of took from online and tried to alter a little bit to make it a little bit easier for us to explain. It's a very complicated explanation for something that's appears more simple than it is to explain. So it's a representation of text in digital form used mostly in the humanities to explicitly encode methods for machine readable text. So basically what this does is it takes words and is able to add more information. It's kind of like, we called it, this is not an accurate phrasing, but we called it like an elaborate footnote, because it kind of allows with the word, a kind of a little arrow comes up and it explains to you a little bit more what that word means. So this is encoding, so TDI can be used in 2 different ways. One way is that way, and the other way, when you do TDI, is that you have to kind of bracket everything. So you explain this is a page, this is a paragraph, this is a line. And it goes further down to letting the machine, like the internet and other software, be able to read the text in the way that you want to in certain format.
So here's the real meat and potatoes of what we actually did. And it's kind of hard to see on here, but you'll notice that we have brackets. Much like in other coding languages, there's a very strict hierarchy, and working with these people, their job was extremely important, because without what they did and figuring out what needs to be color-coded and what needs to be turned into a tag, I could not do my job in figuring out how things are placed. As you see at the top, there's all that. That is structure that tells the document that is in fact a TEI document versus an XML versus a PDF versus a normal text document. Later you have others saying about there that, hey, this is our encoding document. And then farther down, hey, this was originally edited, but this is the source material, the book that we used for the actual document, and so forth.
Okay, so now we're going to go through our step-by-step process visually so you can see our preview of our finished product and how we basically got there. So basically what we did was we started, as Mallory stated, by choosing the journal entries we wanted to do. We stuck with the year 1861 because in selections of the journals, it was bracketed into 4 very nice journals, 3 of which were about cats. So we chose that one. After that, we chose specifically May 14th and January 30th. Picture up here is May 14th. We typed it out and then we started, the annotation team, we annotated it in Google Documents. So what we did here was we used basically text colors to indicate specific nouns, like red for animals and green for place nouns. We use highlights to relate pronouns back to proper nouns, such as it, she, they, back to kitten. And also we use Google Docs comments function to basically input our research notes in the very side.
So this is kind of an example of the labeling stuff looks like. So after we'd color-coded everything and kind of labeled everything to what it was, we realized that Thoreau was very vague in some of his wording. So for example, kitten isn't actually just a random kitten, it's a particular kitten that he owns. And he actually, from the research team was able to figure out that he actually named the kitten Min. He actually found the cat when he was rowing past a certain island with his sister, and then they adopted it. So because we now know the kitten in this text means something more than just the word kitten, we're able to give it a label. But because there's no actual animal label, we gave it a person label because it's kind of a similar idea of identification. So when you do that, you have to have like a person label first, and then you explain the person's role with their name, and then we did an event type, which is adoption, and you're able to give the description of the adoption, so it explains a bit more what it was. And then again, you have to close all of them out, or else it won't link in the text. So I worked a lot with making these kind of different things that were in the way that we got from our research team, which was then taken and put in Oxygen. Another example of this is in the other one, in the February one, January, sorry. We were looking at February for a little bit too, and then we decided not to use it. But in the January one, he also named a woodland, but that woodland actually has the actual name and location, so we're able to find that name and location, and able to actually identify woodland for us when he mentions it, link it to a place, which then we're able to use on Google Docs to find it on a map.
So the nice thing about Oxygen is that it had multiple different features to it. And one of the really nice features was that this, which is known as the author mode. The author mode shows you as if it were a plain text document, as if you were looking at it through Microsoft Word, a PDF, or Google Docs. This could not be done in Atom, which is why we went with Oxygen. And it shows, as you can see, these arrows, that's an individual tag. So say, like we mentioned, the hierarchy, first you have list person, then you have person, then you have person name, then you have the name type, and so on. As some of them have many tags, some of them have only a few. And this is the best we could get, essentially, in terms of showing you what it would look like. And this is why we called it the glorified footnotes, because it does more look like a footnote. It looks a lot more complicated than this. In fact, we'll show you very soon what it looks like in terms of the actual text. There it is. So this fun jumble of spaghetti is what it actually looks like in Oxygen when you have to go in and edit it. And all of the blue text, those are all separate tags. All of them, if you mess any of them up, you miss a single slash, you miss a single little bracket, it all turns red. So it was very important that we got our tags right, and it was even more important that we made sure that our hierarchy was right, because if this person wasn't here, then none of this would work. It was especially important because of body and text to make sure that if those weren't there, that none of this would work. And that's why it was very not fun to work with.
Okay, so with this project, we had a lot of hurdles and some easier parts, of course, mostly stemming from our lack of understanding on many fronts, but we eventually found our way.
So I'm going to start with a little bit of the TDI code, since we did learn some of it in class, but to do what we wanted to do and actually to be able to encode different words, we needed to do outside research. So we went to this TDI website that gave more information, or they kind of gave a little too much information. So we're trying to sift through what we actually needed to use and what was extra and not applicable. But in doing that, sometimes we made the wrong decisions and thinking things that weren't important, but they were important. So a lot of back and forth with trying to figure out what it was. And then also with the encoding, just figure out what we wanted to encode. We had a little bit of issue trying to figure out the right labels for it. Like for the example with cat and kitten, they're animals, but there's no label called animal. So you have to use person to be able to actually identify them as their own individual identity and not something that's generic.
Right, so this was just another example of how we demonstrate, rather than just the text, but the actual publication to show that specifically, this is more of why TEI was important as opposed to other languages. Because we have the metadata to show, hey, this is the title of us encoding Thoreau, but we have source material, and here's information about our source material. So that was one of the really big things about TEI, was that for the humanities, it's showing that there are specific ways to catalog certain names and certain types of things that you can't quite do on paper.
So challenges from the research team, I think we can all agree that we were in identity crisis mode for quite some time. And since there were so many ways that we could go about this project, but we didn't really understand like any of them, we were having a really hard time getting started. And just overall like finding a focus and what project sequence we want to go through. And then once we actually did start, we weren't always marking up things that could be tagged, which then kind of was also some more like wasted time and then figuring out what could be tagged, what couldn't be tagged. And then some of the information we needed for the tags was like very, very hard to find and conflicting, especially about the pets, since we picked journal entries that talk so much about a cat. So we had to find all this information out about the cat so that we could tag the cat. There's a lot of issues with that.
And like Daryl specifically, he really, really likes pronouns and nouns instead of using actual names. So it was really hard to find, is this like his kitten that he adopted, or is this like a cat that was in the family for 10 years already? So that was a really big hurdle we had to get through. But we did manage, so now we're gonna go a little bit about what we learned about Daryl through this project. So we placed everything together into a Google map. This is every location that is specified in our January 30th and May 14th, 1861 journal entries. We will be starting with Boxborough over here. So Boxborough, this is the January 30th entry. He talks about two specific locations, Boxborough itself and then a place known as Haverhill. Boxborough is about an 18-minute drive from Durham's home in Concord. On record, he's been there for a minimum of 3 times. Well, the first of this time is, I believe, in 1842 when he simply stopped by as part of like a longer journey. The other 2 were specific trips there to look at a place within Haverhill, what he calls Inches Wood. So Inches Wood is depicted up there, and he calls it within the January 30th entry, Boxborough's noble oak wood and the most handsome feature of Boxborough. So what's really interesting is that the Boxborough Historical Committee managed to track how Daryl walked through Inches Wood based on his journal entries. So he, as I stated, he was there for 3 times, only 2 of which he really explored it. The first time is November 9th, 1860, which he followed this route. So he went from Concord through Inches Wood into a place known as Pine Hill. They call it Pine Hill, but really when he got there, all the trees were basically cut down for a farm, which was really sad. Second time was November 16th in the same year, 1860, when he went from that starting point all the way to a chestnut forest. And this was really significant because in current times, all the trees from this chestnut forest has been cut down, so it really only exists within Daryl's writing. And Daryl really came to Boxborough to research information for a book he was going to publish about forests. Next, we have Mount Washington, which is technically in New Hampshire. And Daryl mentions it in the January 30th entry because he was lamenting how people bought the peak of Mount Washington as private property, and that the Native Americans who originally belonged to that area wouldn't even climb to the top because they considered it sacred. So a little bit of that. Next, we're going to go into May 14th, which centers mostly around Concord. We're going to go from the house icon up to that green fish icon. And for references, the blue fish icon is what we want. But basically, we think that this house over here is on 255 Main Street, Concord. This is Thurl's family house, and the setting we believe it's the setting for the May 14th entry, because even though he doesn't explicitly say it, we do know that it takes place in the house and that the kitten is most likely his. So as for the kitten, after doing a little bit of research, we found out that Thurl with his sister Sophia adopted a kitten in the year 1853. When they found it, as they were rowing back from a river that they described to be on Mr. Picard's land. Mr. Picard was one of Thurl's neighbors, and we found out that he had some territory around Bateman's Pond. So this is where we believe he adopted the kitten, which we also think is his kitten named Min, that is Maltese cat.
Okay, so the major takeaways. So basically, like, why is TEI and coding important and useful to us? So as students of the digital humanities, TEI provides a structured way to digitize text, track changes, and provide like more information within the text.
Right. As you mentioned, TEI is very important in digital humanities, especially as our society becomes more technologically advanced and we incorporate technology more in our lives. And we think that it should be we think more technology should be adapted inside of it. This has been our presentation on encoding Thurl. Thank you so much.
Don't go away. I think there's some questions that people have.
I just can't. I commend you guys because that seems very complex. Can you explain what the program that you guys used and what it was exactly?
So there's a program called Oxygen, showed us by Professor Shack, and it was essentially, think of it as Atom, but 1,000 times more complex with much more utility. So that's kind of why I started off in Atom, and I actually started trying to do, like I showed, like that top three, those top three lines that I explained that show that it was a TEI document. I tried writing those myself, but Oxygen was just like, yeah, no, I'll just give that to you, start and end, all the important stuff, I'll just make for you. So then it allowed me to just kind of go in and work. It basically how we talk about in several of our novels. I think it was information where like people were using machines and computers to calculate, so that way they weren't doing transcription errors, and they didn't have to worry about using so much time to actually like do the calculations. They just have the calculations done and worry about the actual work after that. That's kind of what Oxygen was being used for, was having all of the really simple stuff, like the kind of the foundation that needs to be there is easily made so we can focus on the actual work. Yeah.
So the distinction between like data and metadata is one that I'm still kind of struggling with at this point, but would it be appropriate? So you have your words, right, from the actual journal, and you have the TEI, the XML describing those words. Would it be appropriate to think of those descriptors as metadata?
Oh, absolutely. So as you saw, let me see if I can find it real quick. Can you just go and just find like the actual text, not Oxygen.
Just to see
Right. So we have the actual journal entries. Yeah, like this. This is perfect. We have the actual. So this is the data, right? Data from their actual journal entries, and then we have Oxygen, with all of the blue things being the tags, the metadata. So you're absolutely correct that it helps with the metadata versus the data.
Yeah. That quotation from that Pomerantz uses, and the author was the source of it. I always draw blank on his name. But the map is not the territory, right? So if you think of data equals territory, map, metadata equals map, you've got two kinds of mapping going on. You're mapping these journal entries by attaching metadata to places, people, animals, and so on, that describe what and who they are, what their geographical coordinates are, and then you've taken that mapping of the data and actually mapped it on a map. That's one of the things I really like about the way this project has come together. But the metadata mapping, what you've done using TEI, essentially creates
a simplified model of what is in the journal entry. That's just sort of saying what things are.
It's kind of like what you'd find in the back of an appendix, or the back of a book in an appendix, where you like a footnote. You would see a footnote, and then you go back to the book saying Foxborough was formerly named Foxborough, but spelled differently, and they changed the name based on blah blah blah. That's kind of what TEI does, except in a digital format.
And one of the common uses in TEI projects of identifying things that way in the document is that you can then link them to a list or a table that has all that information of the kind that Emilio was just describing, and then maybe itself contains links to other kinds of related information, or even a link to, say, a Google map. So you can think of the relationship between footnote in the text and something in appendix as a kind of link, but it's not a hyperlink. You can't. You might feel these days that you almost want trying to control F the room. You wrote the blog post about wanting to control it. To find your keys or something, you might find yourself these days looking at print text and wishing you could click on something on the page to get to them. You can't do it, but in this environment you can.
Any other questions?
Yeah, when did it dawn on you, if it did, that today is 115 days to write about it? Today's May 14th.
It did occur to
Right
me.
now.
It did occur to me about a week ago when I found out and I looked in the syllabus that today was Presentation Day.
Totally right now. I did not really,
Yeah, not thinking
totally
about
for the date of things, yeah. So, thanks. Appreciate you picking that up.
Yeah.
The question I have is how I didn't quite catch how you got the information about Thoreau's route through inches. Where did that come from?
Basically, there was, he wrote a lot about, within the specific journal entry itself with that day, he wrote a lot about, I went to this place, I went on this road, I
Right.
turned here, I turned there. So then he wrote about how he, where he started, how he got there, and then what he saw there, which is how they were able to compile that map. Then he said that he came back a couple days later and went to once again specific paths. I turned here, I went to this route, and walked all the way to where they believe the chestnut trees were from.
We added arrows. We added arrows onto it because there is a footpath, but it's kind of hard to see. So the arrows are more to show. It's to make it a bit easier for you guys to be able to see which direction it was.
Very cool. Any other questions? All right, if not, thank you so much. This is great.
Yeah.
I know you have notes. Actually, no.
That's fine. Alrighty.
So you'll want to, on my computer, click the tile.
Click
that
me.
is-
Wait, where are you? Oh, right here.
That's me. That's Shelby.
There we go.
Yay. Oh,
Great.
okay.
Alright. Yeah, I don't want to try slide captions. Alright. Oh, you can see it on there. Never mind. Alright. How's everyone doing? That sounded great. Well, we're to get. So welcome to the spring of 65. Let's take you back a little bit to an era before we were all born. Sorry.
Who's in that?
Actually, my dad was born in the spring of 65, so this is exactly 51 years ago now. And we're talking about Walter Harding and William Kelly. William Kelly has kind of been, I guess, a little discussed in class, not particularly much though, as we focus more on Thoreau. But we had the really fun task of going into the Harding collection and going through and piecing together what William Kelly's purpose was here at Geneseo when he visited, what he did while he was here, and his legacy following all of that. And it's been a really great time. Did I just go ahead?
Go for it.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if anyone else wanted to say anything about that. So our mission, we were really just trying to tell the story of how Walter Harding brought the lost giant of American literature to sunny Geneseo in 1965. He's considered a lost giant, I think, because when you analyze his work, it stops at 1970. And you don't really see much else about him. You don't hear much else about him. The articles we found, we had to dig for. And so he kind of gets buried in more broader issues such as race and ethnicity and all of these bigger topics he was trying to discuss and talk about. He was buried underneath them. But we kept looking into it as the idea of, God, that was such a bad sentence. We looked at it at what he did while he was here at Geneseo and what he did as a professor here. But we also wanted to know, why did Harding invite Kelly to campus and what impact did his presence have here, or here had?
So for our management of tasks, we basically lived in the library for this project. And that's because the main part of our task, or like our project, was sifting through archives in the bottom floor of the library, which no one even knows is a thing. It's like right in the fishbowl, in the like clear glass door kind of things in the middle of the bottom area of the library. So we basically couldn't have done any of this without this wonderful woman named Liz Argentieri, who is the special collections librarian here. So she showed us, she literally unlocked this like massive door with this special key. And we just walked into these like bookshelves with like bookcases and shelves of like Harding stuff. So we had to sift through these documents that included pictures, yearbooks, magazine clippings, articles, letters, anything you could think of that were about Harding or Kelly. So the first thing we did was,
I just want to talk about something really quick. I'm a history major, so I'm not like all of you as a history major. I'm different. So, but there's kind of a dream in like history when you're doing research that you find the box, or you find the one thing that you're looking for, and we found the box. We found the one box with every like thing we needed in it. It was just specifically a William Kelly box. It was awesome. Anyway,
yeah,
sorry.
It was wonderful.
I'm so excited about the box.
So once we find said box, we had to sift through and pick documents that we could fit into our Omeka exhibit. And from there, we scanned the documents. So these were letters, pictures, everything. And we took those scanned products, converted them to PDFs, put the PDFs in a Google folder that we could all have access to. And then from there, organized all these like documents into 3 sections. Harding, Kelly before Geneseo, during Geneseo, and then after Geneseo. So we had 3 kind of groups. And then from there, we split up these groups amongst the 4 of us to decide who would post what onto our Omeka page. So we'll go into this in a little bit, but me and Dom split up the before Geneseo, Dave took during Geneseo, and Shelby took after Geneseo. So, and then with all this then done, we had to do the Dublin core, which is the citations for every single document. And so shout out to Dave. He was amazing and just, yeah. So Dublin core pretty much is the citations for every product, I guess you could say, on Omeka, every document. And we decided it'd be easiest for one person to be responsible for the Dublin core to maintain consistency, and Dave stepped up to the challenge. So thank you, Dave.
Oh, no, okay. Oh, I did the right thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so this is our first kind of page of the exhibit. If you open it up, so it says the exhibit at a glance. As you can see at the top where the little red, is that red? Red bar is. It has all the split up little categories of exhibits that we have in our overall exhibit of the Spring of 65. So we first did the exhibit at a glance, just kind of overviewing what our exhibit would be about. And we decided to include this picture of Harding and Kelly and Harding's wife, and that's one of their first interactions here at Geneseo.
And then we got into Harding, Kelly, and Thoreau. We made a nice connection with that in the next category. Then we split it up to Kelly at Geneseo, and Dave did the author in residence, and then Kelly at Geneseo with New Horizons. And then Shelby did Kelly's legacy and beyond. So the exhibit at a glance just talks about how he invited Kelly here and why he invited Kelly here. They had a lot of the same interests in reading Thoreau's work. He wanted to find something that related to them, so he invited Kelly here, which they formed a relationship, and then we'll talk about the impact that he had on the student community in Geneseo.
So after Dom did the overall like exhibit at a glance introduction, I went into an introduction of who Harding is, and why he was important to the Geneseo community. So this was part of my page. I basically went into who Harding was. So to tell everyone who Harding was, he was an internationally regarded scholar of Thoreau, also a professor at SUNY Geneseo. To give you an idea of his caliber, he has his own Wikipedia page, which is pretty badass, I won't lie. I actually asked Dr. Schacht if he was the one who wrote it, but he's not. So throughout his career, Harding taught at different institutions, but ended up at Geneseo. He actually became the first SUNY faculty member ever to be granted an honorary doctorate from SUNY itself, so he's a pretty big deal. He was devoted to studying the life and works of Thoreau, writing this massive biography, The Days of Henry David Thoreau, that is considered the ultimate study guide of Thoreau's life. And then, as we can see, his impact to Geneseo continues to be acknowledged in several ways. Mostly, or most notably, there's a lounge in Wells called the Harding Lounge, named after him. Yeah, so that was my kind of introduction into the exhibit, starting off with like who Harding was and why he's important.
So a big reason that Harding invited Kelly to Geneseo was because they had the same interest in a lot of things. So one thing was in reading, we have a document of a review on A Different Drummer, which is the book that some of us read for this, which is written by William Kelly. And in that book, it was a lot of like civil disobedience and rights for like Black movements. And that was something that really attracted Harding to Kelly. So that's why he invited him.
Okay, so I discussed mostly what Kelly did at Geneseo, and I know Domenica discussed that just a little bit. But basically, coming into this project, I mean, I had no idea who Kelly was, but Harding did. And so our big question, going into this project was like, why? Why Kelly? Why was he so important? And we don't really know, and we still don't really know. We know, sifting through all the documents and the correspondence, and we had to go through course information, what was English 404? Oh, study of contemporary literature. Anyway, so basically we knew that Harding had written two emphatically positive book reviews for Kelly's two previous novels, which were A Different Drummer and Answers I'm Sure. Yeah. Okay. So we knew that he was already a big fan of Kelly's work, and when the English department was creating this, this English course that I think I discussed. It's basically a course where authors were invited on campus to basically say how it's done, give a first-hand account. So I had to do a little stretching here, and Thoreau was all about taking experience from people who've lived in a certain way, or so that you can live that way yourself. So there's that passage you wanted about it, but so basically I kind of guessed that Harding was trying to get Kelly to share how he was an author, how he dealt with it. And Kelly, to his credit, really kind of jumped into the role. He participated in 5 different seminars, a book reading.
He was writing a book while he was actually teaching on campus, which is interesting. We'll discuss that later. But yeah, he like his classrooms were known for being like, okay, like student A, say what you think about student B's paper when they say that. You know, it's all very polite. And like, oh, that's so good. And then he says, okay, I'll say what you really think. And that's like Thoreau right there in general. Thoreau really hated etiquette and politeness, as he called it. So instead of students kind of being like, oh, this is weird, they really kind of grew to love Kelly's teaching style. He became kind of like a celebrity on campus. He was invited to things that were completely tangential to what he taught. He did like a cinema review on WGSU and anyways.
Hopefully we could like find that recording. I don't think they recorded it, but like
exists.
that would have been so cool.
Yeah. Okay. So eventually, though, Kelly he only stayed one semester. He like the question is why, of course, and he didn't really. We were having some difficulty finding exactly why he left, because, you know, from all we gathered, like, he was very positive about the role. People were positive to him and about his presence, and it's partially due to the fact that he was writing a novel when he was tenured. Well, not tenured, but he was serving as a professor. So we found our other treasured artifact, which was in the box, which was a letter from Harding to this former student of Kelly's. It was dated 1970, so this was 5 years afterwards. It basically gave us, you know, like why Harding invited Kelly, which was, you know, he liked his books. And it also said why he left, which was because Kelly confided in Harding saying, I don't know, like talking about writing so much has made me self-conscious, and I'm also so focused on discussing. I'm also so focused on discussing my students' work that it's distracting from my own work. So he didn't want to settle down just yet. He was only 27, so that's understandable. So yeah, that's why he.
So Kelly's Legacy and Beyond was my page, and that's just so we're aware, that is Kelly from 2012. And I was able to find lots and lots of like news articles and interviews that he did following, I would say pretty much in the early 2000s to about 2015, where he would interview, and he was teaching at Sarah Lawrence College up until his death in 2017. And he was teaching fiction, which is funny because, as you've heard, he became self-conscious about his writing. But I kind of found a reason to why he ended up teaching again. But I'll quickly take you through a little bit more about Kelly. He ended up moving around a bit. He went to Europe for a period of time and then eventually to Jamaica. And I found a really great quote in which he said he wanted his two daughters, Jessica and Cira, I believe I'm pronouncing it right. It's Cira, where they're pictured there down in the corner. He wanted them to grow up in a place where they weren't going to be judged for their race. So he took them to Jamaica, and they lived there until 1977, where they then returned to Harlem, and that's where he ended up staying. And Kelly, kind of in line with Thoreau, believed in voluntary poverty. He wanted to focus on what was important in life, and to him that was writing. That was his family. They stayed in a very small home that didn't cost a lot of money. You put a padlock on the door, and for him it was fine in that regard. He wanted to experience life for what it was worth, but he eventually took the job at Sarah Lawrence College and to help provide for his family further. So he did pass away in 2017 due to complications with kidney failure, which is really sad. But up until he passed away, he was very active on Facebook. I found a whole Facebook page that his daughter Jessica started, And from there, I actually found her Instagram where I got this picture from. That's the 2 girls in Jamaica. And if you go on her Instagram, you can find some other old photos of her and of Kelly. They call him Poppy, which is really cute. And she's still keeping his Facebook page updated, and there's going to be a re-release of a different drummer in June. So be on the lookout for that. And she wrote an autobiography about him as like a forward, I believe. So, or not autobiography, goodness, biography about him as the beginning. So I think it was really great. And the best thing I could have done was search her and search the family, because it did lead me to her Instagram, and it led me to finding some really nice photos of them, including one of him, which is on the webpage. I didn't put it on here, but him in Paris in 1968.
Speaking of pictures, I'm just going to talk briefly about this because it's Dublin. So we've already read about this a little bit in metadata. Basically, Dublin Core is this universal way of sourcing all of your different PDFs and pictures and documents and what have you. So basically, thanks to the help of Liz, and she really was like the fifth Beatle of our group. She was so useful.
This is right though.
Anyways, she gave us like the library's form of the Dublin Core, so we just followed that, and we figured it would be more easier for one person to do all of this, and it wasn't really that difficult. But basically, what we would do is go onto Omeka and upload items, so like PNG files, JPEGs, PDFs, and because Dublin Core is very regimented, everything needs to stay the same formatting. So we made a little collection on the website. By the way, all of this is on a website which you guys can check out. Like, it's on the
Link in Slack.
it's on the Walter Harding website.
WalterHarding.org.
Yes,
Search
our exhibit is the 16th.
Well, actually, I don't think we clicked that make feature button, but that will be what we'll do when we sit down.
Right, yeah, okay. Never mind. All right, that's all I have to say.
So not to be a pessimist, but there were certainly some challenges to our project, especially because we never even heard of Omeka before this class. So probably the first and foremost challenge was navigating Omeka. It was pretty clunky compared to like other processing like platforms like Word or WordPress or Wiki, and that's just primarily because of formatting. Like we couldn't really take a lot of like. You had to take so much time to figure out like, okay, where's this picture going on this page? Where's this text going? And then once you format everything at once, there's no preview feature. So you got to publish it, look at it. Oh, it doesn't look right. Then you have to go back and do everything over again. So for that reason, it was kind of clunky, but we got the hang of it. And then with that said, Dublin Core was also tedious, which Dave could talk about forever, I guess. So there's that in itself. And then scanning documents was also a challenge. I guess this was a good challenge because we had so much stuff to choose from. So we had to figure out what was relevant to our project. And that was just time consuming in itself. I mean, like I said, a good problem because we didn't have a lack of stuff. We had too much stuff. So we had to figure out what was relevant. And then also we had to scan a bunch of documents several times because they came out like too grainy or illegible. We figured out that scanning in color was our friend for the magazine articles and even sometimes pictures, because black and white, you can only make out like one tooth of a smile sometimes. So it was tough. So that's why we lived in the library. And then also the next challenge was just feeling satisfied with everything we had. Like I said, there was so much stuff. So we were always wondering, could we add more? Could we add more? Like, when do we stop? When do we give this up? And for example, Dr. Schacht hooked us up with this guy named Paul Scipione, who was a student of Kelly's, and we were really excited to interview him. That could have been awesome data to put in our, in our exhibit, but he ended up not getting back to us, which is okay. But we eventually had to put it to rest and say, okay, we feel good about our exhibit. We're gonna take a deep breath.
So some powers and limitations of Omeka is that one thing that we never ran into a problem was uploading a file that was too large to fit into Omeka. So all of our documents, I guess, were in the lower 2 megabytes. So
One
it
was
didn't.
close.
One was close, but we didn't run into a problem of having too large of a document to upload. There are a lot of other exhibits that we explored at first to see kind of how things were done. I guess one other issue we kind of ran into was either like adding on to another exhibit about that had relevant information to this. We mentioned another exhibit in our exhibit just so that we weren't repeating information that was already posted on the site. There was a lot of easy themes and templates to choose from, which it puts it in a really organized manner. And then Dr. Chat also helped us all become super admins, which is like this title that allowed us all to work on it at the same time. So like it would be similar to everyone working on a Google Doc, I guess to call it. So we were all able to work on it individually rather than one person uploading everything. Some limitations was you need a really good deal of knowledge of Omeka and Dublin Core to really organize it in the way the website is structured. So Liz gave us this kind of organized worksheet that had everything we could include in the Dublin Core, which helped out Dave a lot. And then it was difficult to manage our collection at first. We didn't know, like you have to upload an item before you go, you have to upload the item before you go to post about the item. So we would go type in and then try and drag the item from our computer, but you have to upload it first before you drag it from your computer. So it has to be done in a very like specific manner. And then this is a big one. It's not necessarily a safe place, we called it, because it's not like Google Docs and it doesn't save your writing every 2 seconds that you type. So when we were typing into the exhibit, you have to actually click a button that says save changes, and Elise ran into an issue where she didn't at first and she wrote this whole big paragraph, but thankfully she typed it in another Google Doc before she pasted it into there. So also, as we were all super admins, obviously we didn't do this, but whoever is categorized as a super admin can go into other exhibits and actually like manipulate something if they wanted to. We didn't do that, but that's another issue that could happen. And then yeah, Omeka can be sketchy sometimes. We really learned that when we were all together working on it, sometimes pictures wouldn't show up on Elise's page, or like if I was working on it and I clicked save changes and like it went into the other, like the published page, we would refresh it and it wouldn't be there. So it was like a little weird sometimes.
Okay.
We don't know why, but that just happens.
Yeah.
So,
It's really tempting to hit like delete all button on the thing you're working on, and I don't know, it was there, it was an option. Me? Okay. So what we learned about Thoreau, the title "A Different Drummer" was influenced and derived from a quote by Thoreau. He was one of the nation's leading scholars on Thoreau was SUNY Geneseo's very own Walter Harding. By the way, that dude deserves more than just like a room on campus. Can we rename a building for him? Because he's kind of like a big deal from what I understand now. And through Harding's invitation, a friendship formed between two scholars and impacted our campus community in the spring of 1965. And honestly, I think it kept going. There was a letter that is featured on my page from 1970 where Harding was still teaching a different drummer. It had been about almost 10 years since it had been published, and he was still teaching it in the classroom. He felt that this knowledge was important, and he felt like Kelly was a true Thoreau scholar. And it's so nice to kind of see that friendship that happened 50 years ago in these documents. It was really like, I don't know, it felt like humbling almost. Is that it?
That's it.
I guess that's it.
All right.
Bad note time on, but questions, comments, concerns?
So you mentioned that you had a lot of problems with Omeka, and if you could have used any other kind of like process, like say WordPress, would you, if you could go back and change it?
Yes.
Yeah. I just think the formatting, I think the reason Omeka is probably used is because Dublin Core is so prominent on there, and for
It's quite good with that.
yeah, it's great for that.
It's
like,
just
it
not
has the
great
kind of-
with this. Text.
Yeah, like I tried to, for whatever reason, if you go on my page, I have like 4 pictures at the bottom, and if I had 5, it would like fill up the whole bottom, but I only have 4, and I can't center the 4 bottom pictures. They can only be to the left or to the right, and it bothers me. I can't change this. They can't be centered. There isn't an option for that, and I feel like I could probably make that an option elsewhere. So it's a lot of like little formatting things and little things that we, but honestly, it's not horrible, but it could be better.
Michael said this, and I might have missed it, but is this published in a way that people like outside of our class and even outside of Jen's group find it?
Yes. Yeah.
Actually, with the page, I'm tempted with Kelly's Facebook page that I found. I want to post a link there and be like, hey, like we made this.
Mhm.
Make sure it's right. Like we'll go in and fix it if it's not. But yeah. So it should be published, but we should probably make it featured.
Yeah. It's just walterharding.org.
Yeah, you might have trouble finding the exhibit. They haven't made it a featured exhibit. We'll get it featured. And
Isn't that ours? This is the one from last year or prior year.
you can see the recently added items. The top one is the Jessica Kelly.
So this is us. If you were to go here, you could just go to browse exhibits, and we're the spring or spring of 65. It's a little bit of the ways down. But we'll send out a link if you guys are interested to see it.
Yeah, one thing we were talking about was like, we were like, oh my gosh, Kelly's wife could see this.
Yeah.
We have to make sure it's all
His
right.
daughters, they're
Yeah.
only in their 50s or 40s and 50s, so they're gonna see it.
Yeah.
So I had to get in contact with Kelly's wife in order to get permission to share the letters that you wrote to Harding. You might not think about it this way, but if you write a letter to somebody, from the moment you have written the letter, you have copyright in that letter. You don't have to get it registered, you don't have to go to Congress. It's the work of original authorship by you. It doesn't have to be published anywhere. It required getting the family's permission, since Kelly's no longer alive, to make his letters to Harding public on the site. And I actually reached out to her on Facebook maybe 6 months or so ago, and just sent her a message. Got no response, but it so happens that a PhD student in English at UCLA, I think it is, Mark Gallagher, who works on Thorough, and who I know through the Thorough Mafia. He has been working on an article about different and Kelly's career in general, and so he had correspondence with Aisha Kelly, and I got him to do an email introduction for me, and I'm quite excited about the fact that you guys were putting this together. I think she will be really interested in seeing how it comes out. They apparently had a great time here, and she told me, and I think I put it in a message to Slack to you guys, that their son was born while they were here, and he did the artwork for the new edition of the different.
From what I know, he doesn't have any sons. He has 2 daughters, Jessica and Sierra.
Oh
no. This might not go well.
I misunderstood something about the message, or
Yeah, from all the news articles I read, and I read multiple. There were
from
only
later,
two.
from later on.
Yeah, there were only ever 2 daughters mentioned. So,
We'll
oops.
We'll find out. We'll get to the bottom of that. Maybe you didn't. Maybe there's another box that needs to be.
Anyway.
Other questions that you guys have?
We've been talking for a while. I feel bad.
Did you have a fun time?
I loved it. I loved getting deep in there.
It seems like you guys are very knowledgeable and
Oh, thanks.
He's definitely an interesting guy, so check out our exhibit and
Yeah.
look into those news articles and follow his daughter on Instagram.
And if you want to go to the special collections little thing. It's really cool. You could even look through the old, like there was Geneseo yearbooks for the college. Like,
Right.
It was
There
really cool to find out a bunch of stuff.
Those are in the stack, so you don't need permission, but if you do want to go into the archives, you have to contact Liz. You should
I'm very happy to let you in.
Oh, she's
Yeah,
Wonder
there's
Woman.
a ton of really cool stuff.
Just so we're clear, you can't go into the special room. She will bring this stuff
So
out.
you see it in boxes.
I asked.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. One more and then I'll take a break.
I was giving it to you and then you walked away. It's okay. I felt like a kid, like I was like one.
Oh, no, you don't need to. I already shared, I shared the two encoded files and the presentation we have in a file.
Yeah.
Sorry, a folder.
Is that one of them?
Yeah. You mind if I
Yeah,
get
if
this
you
desk
wanna
out?
send that to me, I'll add it.
You're too sorry, probably. No, I didn't do it. Yeah.
Rather do it now.
Doesn't have to be
Oh, here, did you change it to? Okay, so we did ours on a timeline. It's very straightforward. It's a Walden timeline, so it goes through the process that Thorough went through to write Walden. So we focused on before, during, and after the publication.
So like she said, the purpose was to look at his life, not just during while he was at Walden Pond, but before and after. And I think that was important to look at before, especially like specific events that happened before he went that like contributed to that, especially when he went to Harvard, and back then it was super cheap, but to them it wasn't. And I think his father and uncle opened a pencil business, which was super successful. So we found that, which then realized that helped contribute to his time at Harvard. And then looking at his life during it was super important, just like the different dates we found that were important to like, that contributed to the book. And then after, we found that the Civil War was going on during it, which played a big part in his life because he was a part of like the abolition movement, and he gave like a lot of speeches and lectures, and some of his lectures that he gave after contributed to like the chapters of his book.
Yeah, he spent a night in jail for his beliefs too, which many people do not know. I Googled it, and apparently there's a one-act play on it. I don't know, but yeah, we found that out too, and we'll tell you about that when we go through our timeline. So this is what we tried to avoid when we were dividing work, because we do not want one person doing all the work, because I know that we've all been in horrible group projects where that was the case. So that is what we tried to avoid, and we split it up by me focusing on major life events, and then we also split up in focusing on Thoreau's time during Walden, after Walden, major historical events during the time, focusing on pulling information from Walden and section of journals, and so on and so forth. So we made sure that everyone had a job and that no one was slacking, because it'd be obvious if someone was slacking because you could see it in the timeline. So that's what we tried to avoid in doing this project. It's tricky.
So we did face some challenges when we were doing this. The first one we experienced was the timeline website did crash, and we didn't know how to fix it. It crashed a lot. It crashed actually 3 times, yes. So we couldn't go on the timeline website to check how our work was actually coming out, to see if the pictures and all the information was being put on correctly. But it did get fixed the next day, and then the next after that, but it crashed a few times. So we just had to roll with it. Hopefully it works today when we show you. We're not sure.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, fingers crossed. The next one was we wanted to do photos, but you can only add a photo that has a URL. So we wanted to show you guys the different versions of Walden, and we did the fluid text in class. So what I did was I took a screenshot of those, and you can't put a screenshot in this document or this Excel sheet. So what we had to do was we had to paste it onto a blog post. We had to post it as a blog post. So each image had its own URL, so we could then put that URL into the correct box on the Excel sheet. The next one we did, we wanted to figure out how to categorize the timeline so it was more effective and organized. So what we wanted to do was we had to have one tab about his life, one about his book, one about what was happening in the world at the time. And so what we did was we found on the right side of the Excel sheet, there's a small column that says group. And what you would do, you type in either life, book, or world, and that helped categorize this timeline to make it more simplified and organized for us. The last thing that happened was we were going to use the website again, the timeline website, and it was not working, and it did not crash this time. It was actually something was deleted on something was deleted on the Excel sheet. So we had to figure out why it wasn't coming up and what it was. So we had to go through the whole entire sheet, and we actually found that the data column title was deleted, and because of that, it wasn't going through on the website. So we had to just put data back in on that column. And it finally started.
Yeah, exactly, because like half the time it was just user error, I have to say, because having however many of us are in this group, I can't do math right now, 5, right? Okay, not count, yes. So having 5 of us on a sheets at once was a lot, because you kind of had to like navigate around people and make sure that no one was changing things or editing over you. So that was definitely a challenge, but it was also very useful too, which we'll talk about.
Okay, so the main tool we used was Timeline.js. We got to play around with this a little bit in class, but we had the opportunity to kind of delve deeper into it. And so here's a picture, some screenshots of our Google Sheets. And that's what it opens up as, and that's where you put like your data in. So like the top part, that's where our heading kind of got deleted, the year, month, day, and time. Somehow time got deleted, and because of that, you can see the whole timeline. So it's just little things like that. So you have a place where you can put the date, time, headline, the text, and then the URL for the images, the media credits, media captions, and on the far, this is your right, you can see where we grouped up life and book. And the nice thing about it was that nothing had to really be in order when you put the data in. So it could be, yeah, because if we had to reorganize every time we found a date and put it in, it would be a mess. But luckily it did that for us. And then, this is just a picture of our first slide. I just put this in because you can see over here the life, world, and book. So you can see how it grouped up. So it's all one fluid timeline, but then you can see how all the events are separated. Okay, so as Nicole went over, for the most part, I think some advantages were that it's simple. It's pretty simple. The format is pretty easy to use, and it's also free, which is nice. You can incorporate multiple layers, which was really nice for organizing all of our information. If you wanted to have like a life event of his that affected the book, his time at Walden that he used, and also maybe like a historical event that was going on in the world that influenced him. Google Sheet, it saves automatically, which is nice, and more than one person can be on it at a time. And then I said dates in any order. The downside with some of this stuff was that the website would occasionally crash. And Google Sheets, although we could all be on it at the same time, it would be a little confusing. So, but I think we did save a lot of the confusion by just making sure everyone knew kind of what event or what date they were putting in, so that we didn't have multiple, or we just didn't have one show up. And then, yeah, if you have to put in an image, it has to be a URL, so you have to post it somewhere. And yeah, and so that's about it for the presentations.
All right, so excuse me, we already talked about some of the things we learned about Thorough, but some of the basic things we came across while doing our research was that he actually changed his name. It was originally David Henry Thoreau, and then he changed it to Henry David Thoreau, and he was inspired by Emerson to do that. And then, like he said, he went to Harvard, and back then it only cost $179 with room and board and tuition to go there, but it was still a struggle for him to get the money together. But luckily his family owned the pencil business, So they were able to scrape up some money, and he was able to go. And then he built the house at Walden. He after he wrote the book, or after Thoreau wrote the book, he gave lectures on the chapters based on Walden. And then in 1862, it was actually 10 years after the first publication of Walden, and right before he died, that he changed the name of the book. It was originally Walden or Life in the Woods, and now it's just Walden. And then, like you said, he went to jail because he refused to pay the poll tax, which supported slavery, and that went against his morals. So he went to jail for a night.
Now we're going to show you our timeline. I look proud of it. It's very organized, which I like because I like organization. So I like how it's organized into different parts. And then I sort of focused on his early life. And so because obviously when discussing his formation of Walden, it's important to go into how he got to that place. So I'm just going to go briefly. So Thoreau was born. So yeah, this is just his childhood home. I'm going to go over briefly so we can get through it and allow time for questions. And then obviously you see here we added the image, and then the media caption is here. And then this obviously corresponds with the life. It's kind of hard to see. It's kind of a little, it's darker here, but this is the life column of the timeline, or row, or whatever it is. Yeah, so it corresponds with this. So it'll continue. Here. And then we also kind of incorporated different historical events of the time. So Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was published. Then the pencil business. Sorry, I got a little spazazzy with the titles. But yes, so Thoreau's uncle actually stumbled upon a graphite mine and then went into business with Thoreau's father to make pencil business. So Thoreau actually worked really alongside his father and helped him out a lot. And he studied, I believe, German making or some sort of making pencil techniques in order to like perfect the pencils. And they're actually like really good pencils, hard to find now. I tried to find pictures of the pencils, but I couldn't really find any like authentic ones. But then Thoreau entered the Concord Academy. I'm just going to go over briefly another historical event. Liberator was published. Thoreau begins his studies at Harvard, and then this is an academic building on Harvard campus. I'm not sure which one, but it was cool to find a picture. Journal, again, different. And you can see as we're continuing on the timeline, you see how, like, obviously this is in world category and it continues on in succession. That is where he met Emerson, which is really important. And then here we go.
This is where actually, excuse me, this is where he started writing his book, and we want to show you a picture of his journal to begin with. So this is an actual snapshot of what his journal was. And then here's the Walden Pond. So we just went into a little bit on what Emerson did to help. Then we showed, this is actually a tombstone at Walden of the exact place where his house used to stay. So they have that kind of like centered off so no one can walk in that spot, but it's still pretty cool to walk around and see that. Then we showed the first draft of Walden, him going to jail. And then here's some lectures that he did when he leaves Walden. And this is where I was showing you with the images where I took the screenshots and we had to post it on a blog post because I want to show you guys, you can't see very well, but this is version B, this is version C, and I was just trying to show you the different ways that they changed. And this is just how we embedded it into the type. So some lectures that he did. He did a few lectures when he was staying at Walden, and he actually did lectures that were based on most of his chapters in his book. It's just some other stuff that we did.
Yeah, I think that's basically
and then
it.
Just to quickly show you, this is what we actually used to put all this information in. So all we did was we filled it out like you've seen before, but we had quite a few stuff in here. All you had to do was copy the URL, put it in the timeline website, and then it made the timeline for you.
And as you can see, these dates obviously aren't in order, but once you open the timeline and type it into the Timeline.js website, we copy the link to your spreadsheet, then you paste it in there and you just click this button that says like open, preview a new file or a new window, I believe, and then they pop up and it's in order, which is very nice because I was worried about having to put every date in order and having to worry. I just didn't want to worry about that, so that's awesome. But I think that's all we got. Yeah.
Questions from you guys?
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you guys know this, but if you write civil disobedience and then you go to jail?
It was actually inspired, and you can go to the slide. It was that inspired him to write civil disobedience because the night he spent in jail was based on the fact that he didn't want to pay the poll tax that supported slavery. So he spent the night in jail, and then someone actually anonymously bailed him out, which I find interesting.
Wasn't it this?
I can't remember who exactly it was.
So it is
but
thought. It is
yes,
not
we do not know.
entirely
It is
clear.
a mystery. So yes, it definitely inspired him to write civil disobedience in his lecture on it.
He mentions in Walden going into town one day and being arrested. And so it's important, I think, to realize that he gets arrested while he's living at the pond and talks about that. So that's it's another reason why it's strange that some people come away from the book with the impression that he has made a claim to live far away from civilization and out of contact with everybody else, all by himself in the woods. Because he went into town.
Yeah, he went into
regularly,
town frequently. Yeah.
and he got arrested, and he writes about getting arrested and spending that night in jail, objecting to slavery and also to the war with Mexico, which abolitionists in general saw as an effort on the part of the U.S. government to expand slave territory by acquiring more land and making that slave land. So abolitionists in general were opposed to the war with Mexico.
Also with his lectures, he was living at Walton at the time, so it wasn't just he stayed there. He did go around and do lectures all over.
Yes, that's right. Talking about his experiences. And if you read in the Reader's Thorough, which we're going to hear a report about soon, if you read Resistance to Civil Government, which was the title of the essay that he published in 1849, so that's 3 years after he's been arrested, 2 years after he's left the pond, and while he's still in the middle of writing Walden, he publishes this essay, which he had delivered as a lecture. I don't know if he delivered it as a lecture while he was still at the pond, but he delivered it as a lecture on the importance, as he saw it, of not supporting a government that was so deeply morally compromised as the U.S. government was through its involvement in slavery. That later, it was only after he died that it acquired the name civil disobedience. So it was called Resistance to Civil Government when first published in 1849. Other questions for these guys?
It's pretty straightforward. It's an easier program to work with, I feel like. Just website errors sometimes would inhibit us, but it's not it.
I'm curious about how you made decisions about what events going on in the world you should include. So you've got Publication of Frankenstein was one. Any particular reason for choosing that? Or the Panic of 1837 was another one. Any particular reason for choosing that and adding it?
I just chose like important events that like are pretty popular. And the Panic of 1837 actually
when he came out of Harvard, right? It was hard for him to find a
Yes.
job because
That's
the
why, yeah.
economy was really bad at the time because of that. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe he tried to be a teacher
Yeah.
at some point, and then that didn't work. And then so he went back home and he helped with the pencil business. I believe too.
Did a brief stint as a teacher and quit the job because he was required to administer corporal punishment to the students.
Yep.
And didn't want to do that. And he and his brother tried to open their own school briefly.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to
That
find
didn't work
research
out.
on this, but
Yeah.
I couldn't find it anywhere for some reason, or from any credible source at least. But
All
right.
Thank you, guys.
thank you.
So let's take a short break, get up, get some drinks, eat. And which group will we? Oh, okay.
Yeah. I like what I was thinking. Trying to like over that. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Particular.
They put on HGTV. I love Rocket Brothers, so it's like, look at the TV concert.
Can you click on the? I don't know how this works. Do you want to stand here? I think I should stand there so that I can move the.
Okay. Oh, so you're moving.
So, we did our project on, we added a text to the reader's Thoreau. So we added, obviously, a work by Thoreau, and we chose to add one of his essays called Paradise to be Regained. So.
Okay, so the objective of our project was to add a text to the Reader's Thoreau website, which, as I said, Paradise to be Regained. And we were supposed to add informative and interpretive comments to this text on the Reader's Thoreau. So the purpose of this was to show our interpretation of the text and to guide readers in their reading of the text, but also to show what we've learned about Thoreau through the course of the semester and in reading another one of his texts. So it was hard, or it was kind of a process for us to pick the text that we wanted to choose because we wanted to be something that related to the discussions we held this semester. And we looked for stuff that talked about technology and humankind's relationship with it. So we stumbled upon Paradise to be Regained. And this is an essay by Thoreau in response to John Adolphus Etzler's book, The Paradise Within Reach of All Men. And this step was completed as a group, but we wanted to find, or we had to find a plain text version, and we got this from the Anarchist Library. So the essay is written by Thoreau, and it's in the form of a book review, and it was first published in the United States Magazine and Democratic Review in 1843. So it's a review of the book, The Paradise Within the Reach of All Men Without Labor by Powers of Nature and Machinery, and addressed to all intelligent men in 2 parts. Very short and concise title. So in this work, Etzler says that modern technology, like we can advance it to the point where we can create a paradise in which men do not have to labor and can live in luxury based on these technological improvements that he details throughout this book. And then an example of one of these is the satellite, which is a general purpose cultivation tool that was to be propelled using ropes to transmit power from a stationary source that was powered in turn by wind. So Etzler has all these ideas for how he can advance technology to the point where he creates a laborless society. And we can see how, like, with Thoreau's skepticism in his other works, like we saw in Walden, his skepticism of technology, so why he may push back on that. So in his response in Paradise to be Regained, he kind of has an issue with this utopian society in which technology can improve, or Etzler says technology can improve lives to the point where you don't need to labor, and he's skeptical of this. So this is some of the Thoreauvian themes in the text, and he also has this discontent with humanity's ill-founded attempts to improve upon nature, especially since they fail to improve upon themselves.
Also, it's just interesting too. So when Etzler is going through like technology, Lizzie gave an example of the satellite, but he also, in a way, predicts the future technologies of like solar panels and wind power. And it's interesting too because in a particular passage, Etzler is very focused on wind, and he's still kind of caught up on steam, which of course now is a big issue because of coal making steam. But Thoreau was thinking about, well, what about the power of the tides? Like nature has just given us this immense power that we don't do anything with. And I just remember learning a long time ago about how they're trying to do things with that now. So they're kind of going back and almost enacting what Thoreau saw could work. So I think that's interesting.
So after locating the text, we imported into Atom, which is an open source text and source code editor. And there were a few things that we had to do, such as removing formatting and styling that was used in the anarchist library, and then some other things that we found challenging that Claire will touch upon later. But we also removed all the curly quotation marks and commas and replaced them with straight quotation marks and commas, which we did using the find and replace function in Atom. So this is just one of the things that we did to clean up the text.
And so, yeah, and what's meant also by straight versus curly. So curly is how they would appear like formatted, and so they're not really then quotations. Like it's kind of just, it doesn't make sense in the HTML, so you have to replace them with the straight quotation marks, which are just like the 2 dotted lines, which would come up in Atom. But from the plain text source that we got, they were curly, so we had to fix them.
So then once we cleaned all the digital text, we had to compare the digital text to a physical copy just to make sure that we had everything correct. So the first thing that we did was rent Paradise Ravine from the library. And then it was me, Lizzie, and Avery. We took turns comparing the physical text to the clean text. And while we didn't really find much discrepancies, there was just a few things. Like there were some places where an exclamation point would be replacing a comma, so we fixed that. And then there were a few footnotes on the actual text that didn't exist in the digital text, so we added them to be more precise. So then once we did that was when we actually moved on to uploading the text into the Reader's Thorough. So after we compared them, this is when we updated them, and then at first, we had a problem with the fact that we did not have authorial access on WordPress. So the way that we fixed this was Dr. Schatt was able to grant Claire authorial access. And at first, she uploaded the essay through blog post placeholders. And so we kind of had difficulty with this process, but eventually we were able to upload them as an actual page, and we were able to decide how many paragraphs we wanted for each page. So when we did this, we looked back at Walden especially, and we kind of just saw how for each page it was around like 12 to like 15 paragraphs per page. So that's kind of how we based how we set up Paradise to And then as for our actual comments on the Reader's Thorough, we each were required to comment or to post 2 comments. And so we kind of just detailed some things that we found, and we found that, as we mentioned before, Thorough like really predicted a lot of things that happen in the future, like hydrostatics and wind power and things like that. And while he doesn't completely condemn technology, he just warns his readers not to use it to erase labor or the natural order. Another thing we found that Thorough argues in this essay was that we cannot turn a nature into a paradise without first fixing ourselves, our flawed perceptions of ourselves, the natural world, our intersection and connection with it, and of life itself.
So we faced a couple of challenges, as we kind of already touched upon. So probably like one of the bigger like overarching challenges was that we did most of the digital text cleaning in Atom, but Atom isn't collaborative, so only one person can work in Atom at the same time or at like one time. So we kind of just like, so I ended up doing the cleaning because it wouldn't really make sense to have everyone do the cleaning, because then to consolidate it, it would have been difficult. So that was one challenge. And then in the actual process of cleaning the text, there were some other challenges. So there was it's a book review. Thoreau was reviewing Etzer's book. So he uses a lot of quotations. Like the text is almost 1/3 quotations, I believe. So there are several like block quotes wherein like the quotes take on, they're like a mini paragraph within a paragraph. So I didn't know at first like how I would have that come across in the like the code. So eventually Dr. Schack showed me how it would work. And to do that, we had to use the span tag and the span class of block quote in para. And that would allow the block quotes to be formatted within the paragraph. And so this is how the quote would start. So span class equals block quote and para, and then you just have to close the span tag at the end of the quote. And this is how, that's how it would look in the Readers Thoreau website. And then another challenge was there are Greek characters in Paradise to be Regained, so it was difficult to write out the Greek characters in HTML. So Dr. Check also had to lead us to a source that showed us how to do it. And then also, for one thing, the version from the Anarchist library that we got wasn't totally correct. Like, it had a lot of accents on top of Greek characters that don't exist. So I went through such a headache-inducing process of looking for those accents on the particular Greek letter, only to find that it doesn't exist. And so that was a little frustrating, but it was fine. So this is how it looks in Atom. So it's a block quote, and then this is, so for certain ones you can just write ampersand mu, like the one that you want to write. But for some of them I had to use the number 941, a pound sign, to get one with an accent above it. Because as you can see, this one correlates with the epsilon that has an accent on top. So it ended up looking pretty good in the website, I think.
Yeah, so in terms of what we learned, could you just
oh yeah, sorry.
So what we learned with respect to technology specifically, obviously using Atom to reformat the plain text document. We've learned a lot about, the general semantics of how Atom is used and how it is used to format these documents, especially in using the find and replace feature. But also we found that in Atom, you can't necessarily see how the final product will look. The preview can only tell you so much, because when you post it to the Readers Thoreau, it'll ultimately end up looking different. So it was tough using Atom because it suffers the same pitfalls as all plain text editing programs do, in that if you edit something incorrectly, it won't work, and it doesn't necessarily tell you where. Also, limitations, we couldn't work collaboratively in Atom. And also with respect to WordPress, we already discussed, initially we didn't have administrative access, and once we obtained it in WordPress, it was difficult to find out how we could switch on comments, but after that, things went rather smoothly. And then with respect to Thoreau himself, we definitely learned a lot more about Thoreau's views. Personally, in my reading of Paradise to be Regained, I found there was a lot of implicit discussion of the effects of technology on the individual. I feel more so than there was in Walden. He discussed a lot of the times how he's not necessarily anti-industry, but is rather against the ways in which industry has moved, to seek immediate returns, such as in sources of energy like fossil fuels, which are more immediately consistent and less difficult to employ, but aren't necessarily as good for the environment and don't necessarily have, long-term, credibility, I guess. Another word for credibility. And also he did discuss, living life deliberately, of course, and harmony with nature, of course, Paradise to be Regained, of course, being a reference to nature, the paradise that we already, exist in. And it definitely, reading Paradise to be Regained opened my eyes to Thoreau's views on technology, and that before I definitely subscribed to the more general view that Thoreau is just, a bit of a, what are they called? A Luddite, but in reading Paradise to be Regained, I found that his, problem with technology was, a problem of degree rather than kind. And then, we found that Thoreau is, just like us, in that he's responding to this critical paper written by one of his peers, engaging in academic discourse with what he thinks is important, though he did not include very many citations.
Yeah, and that's actually, he changed a lot of Etzler's words, he altered a lot of the quotations. And so it's for that reason we talk about this in our note on the text, but because we chose the physical text that we compared our Anarchist library version with was Glick's text, and his copy text was the 1843 original version from the magazine Democratic Review, but he does also talk about the 1866 version, where the 1866 version got rid of about a third of the text, the part that was mostly quotations, because the quotations were kind of incorrect. They severely altered Etzler's work. However, Glick chose not to use the 1866 version because he didn't understand why the quotes were removed. Because there wasn't a clear agent who did that, and there wasn't a clear purpose as to why. So also, we could show you guys, I think, our actual site, how it looks. So this is like the cover page with like the PDF of just the first page of the PDF of the original 1843 version. And then you go through, you can see our note on the text, where we have like places where you can download the PDF and just a little background information on it. And then this is the text itself. So and then we've like got our comments over here on the side. So if you guys want to take a look at it and read it, feel free. I'd like to see what you guys think. Any questions?
If you would open up one of those comments that you guys.
Here's one with 3.
Yeah. And so I was looking through your comments through the last couple of days, and I noticed they were all posted to our group as opposed to being posted to the group called General Discussion, which would make them visible to the, like, if I look now without being logged in, I'm not seeing any comments. So my idea was that you would post them to General Discussion.
Oh.
I only realized while you were giving the presentation that you couldn't have posted them to General Discussion. You probably didn't even see the option, because whenever a new text is added at the Reader's Thorough, any group that is going to read the text collectively, you have to add the text to the group, and I don't think I did that. So that's on me. I can fix that, and I can actually reassign them so that they'll be posted to General Discussion. It won't be necessary to log in, see them. Could you talk a little bit about what kinds of things you all decided to leave comments about? You don't have to go, go one by one through comments, but just talk generally about what you decided to comment about and what kinds of things you added as commentary.
I mostly found it interesting. I actually ended up looking back at a lot of my comments in Walden, because I found a lot of connections when when Thoreau was quoting Etzler about technology, and it kind of made me interested in how Thoreau responded to that, and how his responses were also reflected in Walden. So I think even in the one that's, oh wait, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I don't know what I just did.
I think if you just
go back and click on that.
There we go.
Okay. Well, you scroll down a little so that you can see mine.
Yeah.
So I said that it was interesting that both Etzler and Walden are interested in how to better mankind, but the way that they want to do this is different, in that Etzler has this kind of utopian view in which he puts forward these even this satellite, or all of these technological improvements that he thinks will lead to man accomplishing more in 1 year than in thousands of years. And I kind of just talked about how in Thoreau's idea, especially you see in Walden when he talks about the telegraph, and I quoted him and how we are in great haste to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas, but Maine to Texas maybe have nothing important to communicate. So the skepticism of technology, and how he clearly and how he does this throughout his essay, pushing back against what Etzler says, because he doesn't think that it's an end all fix all to society's issues. So.
Yeah, and I kind of was connecting with Walden as well. So the idea that Etzler's proposing all of these mechanisms that will not only eliminate the need for labor from the human experience, but also turn nature into controlled palaces and gardens, he calls it. And reading, so it's interesting because Thoreau is really, in his critique, it's mostly quoting back what Etzler has said, and he kind of does it in a very sarcastic and quibbish tone. So it's sometimes it's hard to understand because when you're reading it, it kind of almost, if you read it very quickly, it would almost seem as if Thoreau was agreeing with Etzler. But if it really, you need to have knowledge from Walden, I would argue, to know that he's really against this sort of thing, because he would argue that man can't control nature when man is barely in control of themselves. He would also argue that labor is never finished because we always have internal self-improvement that we can take on. And of course, he has great grievance with the fact that nature could be transformed into a controlled garden because, and I referenced his work, Katahdin. So like when I saw the movie by Huey, talked about his experience on Katahdin and how to him it was evidence of the supernatural or some sort of divine because of how real and uncontrolled it was. And I referenced that and how Thoreau would feel certainly like a lack if control were established over nature.
I also thought, like, going off on his sarcasm, like, I wouldn't have caught this if like it weren't for like the comments that like we had to leave on the text. So I was going through it towards the end. He says Etzler thinks he can create like a Mahometan's heaven, and I was like, what is that? And then I looked it up, and it's like the Muslim religion, except like it's a Western usage that like Muslims never used and no one uses anymore. And I looked up like a Mahometan's heaven, and like Muslims believe in that nature or heaven becomes this beautiful garden of paradise, and that's kind of like Thoreau is like sarcastically saying like, oh, like Etzler thinks he can create this with technology, and so like that's definitely something that I never would have caught if it weren't for like leaving comments on the text. And I sort of saw this, and I was like, well, I don't know what this is, and I wanted to leave a comment on that, but.
Anyone else want to say anything about comments, or do you have any other questions for the group?
I would just like also add, well, like a lot of our comments were relating this text to Walden. A lot of them also were like, as Lizzie just mentioned, we made several just like historical context comments, just so we kind of got an idea of what was going on at the time. Also, I think one of them on the page that was about wind power and things, like we left a comment about when that actually was like first introduced, just to put into context how like early it was that he was talking about things like that. So yeah, we tried to leave some like historical context type.
Yeah, like right there, I kind of, because they talk about Fourier, so I added something about him just because I like sort of knew of him, and that would be interesting to give context to that.
Yeah, another bit of context worth thinking about that I don't know if you encountered in your research is that there was a very lively utopian movement going on in the mid-19th century, and some of Thoreau's acquaintances and friends were involved in it. So Nathaniel Hawthorne briefly joined this commune called Brook Farm, and then had a very unhappy experience with it, and wrote a book that was essentially a satire on the whole utopian movement. And Bronson Alcott, who was the father of Louisa May Alcott, started this utopian community called Fruitlands, together with an Englishman who was what we would describe as a vegan now. And the idea was that they would have this utopian farm where they wouldn't only not eat meat or animal products, but they wouldn't use any animals for any of the labor of having this farm. But he hadn't thought through very well how that was actually going to work. Not surprisingly, certainly for the 19th century, but it still has applicability today. these two guys had this idea for how they're gonna have a utopian community, and they brought their families there. The women did most of the work, right? The women made it work for the brief time that it did work, but it didn't work for very long, and they had to disband it. So Thoreau was really skeptical of any notion that if you just kind of organize people the right way, or if you had the right technology, this is part of his skepticism even about politics, even though he's somebody who gets involved in the politics of abolition, doesn't really trust politics as the way to make life better for human beings, because he thinks at the end of the day, first thing you have to do is, as you guys really nicely point out, and it really closed a loop for us in our discussion with Thoreau this semester, for him, you first have to fix yourself before we can fix things generally for humanity. Each one of us has to fix the part of ourselves. It's an interesting perspective.
And it's interesting too that you should mention the utopian movement because so he read Etzler's book at the request of Emerson. Emerson told him like, oh, you should read it and then do a review. And Emerson originally wanted his review to appear in the Dial, but then Thoreau had his own ideas and he wanted it to go to the Democratic Review. But it was run by J.L. O'Sullivan, who actually was like, he believed in a utopia. He was part of that movement. So he originally rejected Thoreau's essay and then eventually decided to publish it. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Great, thank you guys very much.
Which one is that? This one?
Cool.
That's not our
Psychedelic.
project.
You just have to switch on your screen to your presentation.
Alright, so our project was mapping Walden, and we created a map of all the locations in Walden that seemed like the most important. And so the purpose of this was to create visuals to go along with what we were reading. And that helped us see what the locations look like, but also picture, like Thoreau did provide a lot of detailed descriptions of like ponds and walks that you went on and stuff like that. So that way we can actually see it and see how it matches up to his descriptions of it. And also to see where they are in relation to each other, so like how close all the places he went were, like how close the town was. And there were a lot of places in the text where he would approximate the distance, say, like there's a couple of places that said they were about 2 miles east of Walden, things like that. So we were able to see how accurate that was and what it would look like in comparison to each other. And then we were also able to link the text and the map together. So we left comments in the text with links to the different places on the map. So then people who are reading can go look at it, or people who are viewing the map can see the text, because we also provided a link to our comments so you could see like which specific section talked about the location.
So as we know, Walden is a very long and extensive text. So our purpose, like Taylor said, was essentially to find every place in Walden and determine which ones we felt were the most important to Thoreau's life and to the story of Walden. So at first, we went through the Walden by hand and found places that we felt were important, mostly that were very local to Walden. Then afterwards, Dr. Schacht actually provided us with a list of about 300 places that are the entirety of
I think it's better to hear other? You know, if you can't get it back, another member of the group can just join the meeting from one of your other computers. They have access to the slideshow from one of the other computers.
Yeah, I just hadn't joined the group. I mean, not the.
Did you get booted out of the meeting?
How do I join?
The link is in. There you go. Oh, Claire's back.
Oh. Okay. No, you're good. This one. This one.
You should be able to just, could you click the present now button? Yeah. There you go.
I'm also part of the AMS. Oh my goodness, sorry everybody. That was not part of it, that was scary though. I was like, that's my voice.
Yeah, we go through the microphone.
I'm just gonna exit. Anyways, so back to where we were, that Dr. Shack gave us a list that was generated by Spacey, a text mining package that I think the next group worked with, so I won't get into that too much, but essentially it is just a text mining package, and we'll see in the next slide kind of the list that we were given. I think there was exactly 302 places that were, some places, some were just kind of things that it may have thought were places that were just capitalized, like some names and stuff. So, but all of those places were not essential to Walden. There was a lot that were like international that were not super essential, and Thoreau mentioned briefly. So we had to really narrow down our list. So we had the list that we were given from Spacey and also our list that we generated, which was between 50 to 75 places that were more local, like places like people's houses and certain farms and things like that that Spacey didn't quite catch also. So we narrowed that down to a list of 28 words. Then we had to refer to the text and some outside sources to write descriptions of every place to put into the map. We use a lot of quotations from the text and some outside sources to acquire like geographic information on them as well. Then we found actual photos of most places, and a lot of them were courtesy of the Walden Woods Project. So I think that most people are kind of familiar with the Walden Woods Project, but the Walden Woods Project, direct quote from their website, is a foundation committed to preserving the land, literature, and legacy of Henry David Thoreau. So they provide educational programs and resources built upon Thoreau's philosophies and work. And then we located each place and placed each on the map. So some of those places were not actual places that, some of them were, but some of them were not actual places that Google Maps recognized as places. So
for example, like Walden Pond is something that Google Maps knows is there, but there are certain places like certain people's houses and stuff that weren't there, or like the Walden Woods were not really places that Google Maps recognizes as a place. So we had to kind of work around that and refer to different sources and quotations in the text to kind of find a general geographic place. And then finally, we linked each description that we made of each place on the map to a comment that we posted in the Reader's Thorough to the place in Walden. It's kind of confusing, but essentially you could access exactly where the location was in Walden from a link in the map, and you could access the map from just reading through Walden. So the next slide is the list that Spacey generated for us. So you can see there's a lot of them. GPE is in front of every single location, and GPE stands for geopolitical entity. So it's essentially a geographic location that is recognized politically, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of, real countries and cities, but there's less of the more informal things about Walden in here. So that's why really in our narrowing down, a lot of this got cut out, and we ended up using really a lot more of our own that we found. So this is our final list that we came up with, and this is the list that is to the side of our map and our actual map. And there's 28 places here, and all of them are in the general vicinity of Walden Pond. This is our map just at a glance, so you can see that it really is in a small area. So we really focused on places that were important to Thoreau when he was living in Walden. And there's a tool on Google Maps that we found that's the measuring tool. It's that one right up there. And we were able to kind of measure how much we did here and how much was really important to Thoreau while he was living there. And so the perimeter of our map, every time you measure it, it gives you like a slightly different measurement, but it's around 60 miles, the perimeter, and the area would be about around 100 square miles, which is really where he did most of his work. This is an example of one of the descriptions that we left. So this is an example of Sudbury, but generally this is what all of our descriptions of our places looked like, where we gave some historical background, the quote in Walden that the place was found, and just kind of its importance. And then you can see that we also put the link to the digital Thoreau in every description. So then when you clicked on it, you could be taken to the digital Thoreau. Then this would be the comment in the digital Thoreau. So all of our comments were very brief because our descriptions were so extensive. So that was Claire's comment in the digital Thoreau. So you could see Sudbury on a map. You would click on the link, and this is Sudbury's quote, but you would click on the link and then be taken to Sudbury on the map.
Okay, so to make sure that everyone in our group did an equal amount of work, we split up selections from the journal and Walden pretty evenly. So for selections from the journal, we all read between 11 and 13 pages. And then we also wrote down the places from those pages to make sure we had them to add them to our map. And we also split up Walden as evenly as possible too. But some of the sections in Walden are a lot longer than others, so some of us only read one section while others read many more. This way we were able to read a similar number of pages in the text and make the workload equal. So Maddie read economy, Jenna read where I lived and what I lived for, readings, sounds, solitude, and visitors. Taylor read the bean field, the village, the ponds, Baker Farm, and higher laws. Sophie read group neighbors, housewarming, former inhabitants, and winter visitors and winter animals. and I read the Pond and Winter, Spring, and Conclusion. So once we looked through our assigned pages and found the places throughout, we narrowed down our list to only include the places that we thought were necessary. And once we constructed our descriptions, placed them on the map, and linked our map to the Walden text, we came together to finalize everything. And during this time, we made sure information was consistent and grammatically correct so that our map looked organized. And overall, we found that working independently was the best way to get the most work done in the amount of time we were given. And then coming together at the end was the best way to make sure that everything looked the way it was supposed to.
Okay, so while our map looks great now, we did run into some challenges. So one of the first challenges, like Sophie and Claire mentioned before, was that we really had to use a lot of time to figure out what places were important because we didn't want to just throw in places that were in foreign countries. We really wanted to narrow it down and make sure that the places were places that Thoreau did frequent and that were important to him. So we chose the list of places that we finalized, and after we did this, some of the places were not included on Google Maps. So I actually found Zilpha's house, which was the house of Zilpha White. She was a freed slave that lived on the outskirts of Walden's property, and her house was not really there. It ended up getting burned down, and without research, I would not have known that this is actually now the Robbins house, which is a house in Massachusetts that freed slaves from Concord lived in, so not just her, but a variety of them. So that's actually where the house is now, but I would not have known that from just reading the text or just doing basic research. Also, Walden Woods, while that is all-encompassing and Thoreau goes there a lot, that is not actually recognized on Google Maps as a geographical entity. So we actually had to draw that out. We can show you on the map later, but it took a lot of work to try and figure out where it was and what it surrounded. So we ended up making just a polygon around Walden Pond. And then one of our biggest challenges was actually getting the comments into the digital Thoreau because we did not have a text tab, and this part's a little confusing, but we pretty much had to try to embed our links in the comments. And this was really difficult without the text tab because it wouldn't work. And then you had to put a URL into it, but we ended up figuring it out and it did work. So how we overcame these problems were pretty much we just figured a different way how to embed them. We formatted the zoom and the coordinates into the links, and we copied and pasted them without a text tab. So that did end up working. And for the specific places, we kind of made them ourselves and made accommodations for that. And then for the places to include on our map, we just made sure that they were crucial and important to Walden. So that's it for that.
So during our journey of mapping Walden, we learned a lot about Google Maps. We all agreed that we've never worked with a site like this in any of our other classes. So it was definitely an interesting experience for all of us. We also learned that we can make a shareable link. So if we wanted to send it to one of our friends, we could send it, they could click on it, which is pretty cool. The maps can also be made public or private, and we can, like we said before and showed a picture of, you can embed visuals and descriptions in. And it was a little tricky sometimes trying to find pictures of certain places since it could be really old. But like we mentioned before, the descriptions consisted of quotes from Walden as well as just some historical backgrounds. You can also use Google Maps as a learning tool. You actually have the ability to use our map and build off of our map and create your own map, which I thought was pretty interesting. As mentioned in the next bullet point, it could be used for educational or personal purposes. And another cool aspect of it is that we can see how many people view our map in total, and we actually have close to 2,000 views, which we're not really sure if it's all just us or exactly. But
we decided that we didn't click on the map that many times. So.
Yeah, we felt a little popular, so
we have 1,800 views.
I thought it was pretty cool.
Okay, so from reading the two texts and finding places that Thoreau mentioned, we feel gained a better understanding on his life. So Thoreau spent a significant amount of time exploring the area surrounding Walden, which many of us already know. He didn't always stay at Walden. He often went to other countries and other bodies of water, and he researched these places and wrote about them, which is how we constructed our list. And so this kind of represents the fact that he was well traveled and very educated. He was also educated at Cambridge College, which is otherwise known as Harvard. And he left. So yeah, people thought that he lived in complete solitude, but he often traveled to other places. So we can assume that he was well traveled because of how extensive our original list was. So today, this information allows readers to gain a better understanding of Walden, especially through his journal entries. So by completing this map, we feel like we're able to gain a better understanding of the places that shaped them.
This is our actual map, and we embedded like a link to it. I mean, it is pretty straightforward. Most of the comments are kind of extensive, and it's more of a thing, you know, to go in on your own, I would say, and read through them because. Yeah.
So as you can see, we included the passage from Walden that the place was mentioned in, and we also included a link here that goes right to Walden, like passage in the text. And it should go. Yeah. So it points out where the place is mentioned, and we also put a link here that goes right to our map.
How many views do we have now? Yeah, so the views are right up there. Also, Walden Woods, this is what Maddie made, where she can actually hand make by herself, because if you search up in the bar up there, you actually can like search Walden Woods. Like some of the locations you can actually search and like just pinpoint a location right to it, but others you kind of have to create it because it doesn't come up in there.
Yeah, that was the same when I was doing Fairhaven Hill. That was the same thing. Like there was a street that was on, but the exact like if you typed in Fairhaven Hill, it wouldn't come up. So I had to like find the road that it was on and like look on the map to find where the woods looked like they were from. So it ended up being like over there.
Then there was some places too, like one of the ones that I did was the Village or Concord, which is a real place. So those ones were easier to locate.
And we also had the ability to change like the markers, the colors, but we couldn't find like a reason really to do that that would make it like correspond with our exact project. But that's also a cool feature of this, just in case any of you want to use it in the future.
And also, I think that we all can kind of agree that no matter what your technological level is, that Google is very easy to use. I thought that this was a very user-friendly site. Honestly, we could all collaborate with it. It was very much like a Google Doc that we could all be on it at the same time, and we could all be adding things at the same time, but also to add a description, if you want to just click on one of the markers, you can see how easy it is. If you scroll down here, you can literally just click edit at the very bottom, or no, I'm sorry, it's this little button right here, the pencil, is that you could just click on it and edit it. Like there was no coding, no, nothing behind it. It was just a very easy, I thought, site to manipulate.
Yeah,
and
it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, and it was a very user-friendly site. I think that we really didn't have any problems. If it crashed or something got X'd out, it was all saved.
Yeah, as long as you submitted the comment, automatically saved.
Right.
Which, was definitely made our life a little bit easier.
Right.
And all these
Overall,
are-
yeah.
Yeah, that's just like so you could change the
Right.
color, and it's all the icons are pretty
Yeah,
self-explanatory.
adding the pictures, we added image like URLs. It really was. I think that most of our problems were more with like the actual Walden side of it rather than Google Maps, because Google Maps was wonderful to use. And then I think that our last slide just says questions or comments.
I have a question. Can you manipulate the map to change the style of map to make it like so you can see kind of like, is that called a photographic map kind of?
Yes.
Yes,
I
you
actually don't even know.
If you
Yeah.
go back to your
You
map,
can make it like a satellite.
Yeah, to kind of see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have done that.
I think it may be from the three vertical dots at the top, maybe you can
Don't feel pressured, I'm just curious.
You can make the map like a bunch of different themes. Like it'll show it in like different ways and like more like a different style. Like, you know how on Google Slides there's like, oh, this theme, this theme. That's like kind of what Google Maps does. So you can make like different colors.
It's public also, so if anyone wants to take a look at it and go through, we can share the link in Slack.
And as we're explaining, and now that that's up there, you can see how you would do it. You can do with their map what we did in class with a map of Native American lands in the U.S. You can choose that export to KML/KMZ. You can download the file that is essentially just an XML file with geographic information. That's why it's called KML. And you can import that into your own Google map, and it'll just put all of their map points onto your map. And you can take their data and build something.
Right. So if you wanted to include like other countries and stuff, we just wanted to focus more on a particular area, so we didn't really lose focus of like, you know, so you could see it and see the most important places that we felt were included in Walden, but like you could take our map and add more places if you wanted to, which is pretty cool.
Any other
Just say that I wish we could collaborate. Appreciate what we were doing.
Yeah.
That's like the next step in my mind.
Right.
So I think, really helpful.
Windows together, yeah. Well, we're going to hear from you guys in a second, and we'll at least be able to bring them together in our head. Let me just say that issue you ran into with trying to actually embed the map in a comment. That's something that's just currently not working on the site. Every user ought to be able to have that text view and to be able to put the little iframe code in to embed the map. So I'm working on getting that fixed. And it's just a shame that it wasn't working when you were looking to do it. But your workaround is great. You know, you click the link and you can just go to that location on the map.
Ideally, there would have been like, you know, our little map then kind of, so.
And they're all posted in the general discussion, so anyone has access
Right, so
to it.
everybody can see them. You can use that iframe code in your blog post. So you should be able to, maybe you already have, I don't know. But you can embed your map in the blog post that you write about your project. You again have to make sure you're in that text view.
Right.
But you can set the zoom level and all of that. So it's just great. Thank you guys. Okay.
It's okay.
Everything. All right, our final presentation. Well, go, Chuck.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
You select it from this.
Right, so we did data mining of the roads Walden. We'll explain a little bit more what data mining means in a second. I'm Emma.
I'm Cal.
I'm Sean.
I'm Brianne.
I'm Melissa.
And we can get started with the tools we use specifically to data mine.
Okay, so all these presentations have been really great, and I like that each had a awesome visualization or somewhere you could go to kind of like look at the physical work in like in an end product. We kind of use these tools more to inform a paper. We did some research using Spacey and using NLTK on some platforms that use Python. to kind of mine through the text, and that informed our own like interpretations of Walden. So rather than having that kind of like site to go to, we wrote a paper. But I think we learned a lot about the capabilities of some of these tools, but also a lot of their limitations as well. And I think both are interesting to talk about in this context. So I'm going to go into our guiding questions.
Yeah, so these are some questions that guided our project. Like we didn't necessarily, I mean, I guess we kind of like followed through with them. It ended up, these are what we started with, and it ended up going in other directions. But how does a sense of place evolve throughout Walden? Does the language of place change with the use of proper nouns? Can digital tools such as Spacey and NLTK be used to better reflect the sense of place? What are some benefits to making this a digital project, and what are drawbacks? And is it appropriate to think of this work as in line with the Rose ethos of living deliberately? So we try to, or we'll talk about some of, we'll address these questions throughout the presentation, and then at the end we'll kind of like review them again to see, you know, how successful we were in our goals to answer these.
Let's break it down.
Yeah, okay, so the Division of Labor, Melissa, Sean, Cal, and Emma each took a chapter of Walden. Sean took the village, Cal the ponds, Emma housewarming, and Melissa took the conclusion. And they mined the language in it to track how Thoreau talks about place and his developments of this sort of language of place throughout the text. So they all downloaded some softwares with the help of Kirk Ann and Dr. Schacht, which Sean just touched on a little bit, and we'll talk about some more. And since I had my computer broke for a minute, it was just kind of a lot to catch up with all the download stuff. So I worked on answering the so what question by analyzing the data that they all collected, trying to take the humanist perspective and make that, well, why do we want to do this? What's good about this information? Why would we want to use these digital tools to figure this out?
So going in order of the chapters of Walden, the first thing we had to do, as Claire introduced like that concept in her presentation, we had to clean the text basically. We had to make it operable in Python, so we had to strip it down of all of the CRUD, I guess, right? So the Python commands would work. And then we came up with, as we all did together, a list of the most common words, and then there's like what words convey that sense of place that we're looking for. And interestingly enough, in the village, the word village is mentioned 11 times, which is one of the more common words. That's like not an article, not a kind of word. So right there, that gives us like an avenue to like pursue this question even further. You can then use the concordance function in the natural language toolkit to kind of sort out the context of each mention of the village. And what I found really interesting was that the village is kind of becomes this three-dimensional space that Thoreau like moved through. It's not a static place that he's like thinking about in his mind, but it's like a physical place that he moved through. So you see through the concordance function that he strolled through it, he walked through it, he set sail from it, he's gone astray from it. So that language of movement is really interesting because it, in a way, like it brings it makes the text very spatialized as well as, like, so on two levels he's really contemplating space and place in his writing. So again, prepositions like they create the same kind of effect, like always positioning yourself in relation to place. I found this bit really interesting. NLTK proved very helpful for me in the village, but Spacey did not. Spacey only found one GP tagged word in all of the village.
and that word was that place was Siberia. And it's interesting that if you like read the context of Siberia, it's actually to convey a sense of unfamiliarity rather than familiarity. You get the sense that through the common nouns of like the woods, the village, ponds, that's a very intimate relationship with these places. Whereas the proper noun, Siberia, conveys a sense of like foreignness or like unfamiliarity. So he says, though he knows that he's traveled it 1,000 times in reference to a path outside of, in the woods around the pond, he cannot recognize the feature in it, but it is as strange to him as if it were a road in Siberia. So it's interesting that the one time he chooses to properly name the place, it is directly like antithetical to like the whole familiarity aspect of writing with such a sense of place. So again, this is just one of the setbacks or drawbacks of using Spacey in the village. It just didn't come up with a lot. It proved a lot more helpful for Cal, and I think we'll take over now.
Yeah, so I got to look at the chapter, The Ponds, and it's interesting to consider, especially immediately following Sean's chapter, because whereas the village was a lot more intimate and just, like he said, spatial, he moved through the village, the ponds is a lot more tangible and relative, so he makes a lot of comparisons between Walden and some of the surrounding ponds, and that's kind of what I was able to look into. So where Sean was able to use NLTK, I use Spacey a lot more because, like I said, there's a lot of actual named entities in this chapter. So this is just a screenshot of my initial list before I really tried to break it down. And part of what's cool about Spacey is that there are different kinds of tags you're able to look at. So like the other group before us mentioned, there's the GPE tag, the geopolitical entities, and that's your countries, your cities, and your states. But there's all of these other options that you could kind of pick out and look at. So for my analysis of the ponds, I looked at the FAC tag and the LOC tag, which are just different ways that it'll pick out locations. So these were my GPE tagged entities. So you get places like Boston, Concord, Walden. And this allowed me to just look at where he was, I guess, in a wider scope. Like, it's basically the bigger picture. So Walden, Concord, it's the geopolitical entity that all of these ponds were centered around. And then once I looked into the FAC and the LOC tags, you get more of the specifics. So this is when you pick out White Pond, Flint Pond, and the other places that stick out. And you can actually see some of the limitations of the technology too. If you look up on the top right below White Pond, you see Eden Walden, which isn't a place. It's actually in the text, Thoreau was comparing the Garden of Eden to Walden at one point, and it picked it out like it was a place. So obviously this technology has limitations. It isn't perfect. And what I did once I was able to pick out all of those places was use NLTK's concordance feature just to see how he talks about these, what are they like in context. And so notably, I really wanted to look at how he talks about the ponds that aren't Walden. So in this example, he uses Flint's Pond, and he talks about the comparatively impure water of Flint's Pond in relation to Walden. He's talking about the sense of poverty around Flint's Pond, which are just ways to show that relationally, Walden is such a great place because there's these similar places that just aren't as notable. And I also then did the same thing with White's Pond. And in this example, it shows that White Pond, he thought it was a poor name for the pond, and I thought that was curious. So I looked into what that part was like in context, and he says it's a poor name from its commonness, whether derived from the remarkable purity of its waters or the color of its sands. So in that sentence, he's kind of hyping up White's Pond. He's saying the waters are pure, it has nice white sand. But he says in these, as in other respects, it is a lesser twin of Walden. So this entire chapter to me reads, and my data mining kind of backed it up, it reads almost as if he's making an argument that Walden is the best pond in the Concord, Boston area, and this is why, and he uses these physical, tangible locations to establish that sense of place. I looked at housewarming and I was more interested in like the difference between the physical place of the house and then the medical physical idea of a home. Interestingly, if you look up home with the concordance features and everything, it only comes up twice and it's not very helpful in doing any sort of analyzation. But then when you do house, it actually comes up about 28 times, which even though it looks like not a lot because there's 6,000 words about total, it actually is one of the only non-article words to come up as often as it does. In fact, the words like some, more actually are used way less than house. And then when I did the concordance features, you can look at like where they show up in the text and everything. It talks about the house to the heavens. Where's the other one? It says somewhere about a desirable shelter. A lot of very positive connotations and feedback towards the physical house, which then led me to look at it more as, even though he was using the physical place of the house, he was representing that idea of the home, even though he wasn't specifically using the word home as often as he was using the word house. Then I was interested also in looking at what Spacey would do. So I actually just got all the stuff to pop up, and then I was looking through. I was looking through the list at the tags and what they referred to, and I noticed that winter and summer came up a lot. So I was interested in the dates tag. I looked more at the dates tag and was scrolling through it, and again, things like winter, summer were coming up a lot, and I was curious how that would relate in comparison to the idea of house and housewarming, as the chapter is called. So then when we move on to that, I did the words count and concordance for both winter and summer. Interestingly, winter shows up way more than summer, but summer seems to have a stronger effect on the language around the house, where he talks about how how the house maintains a kind of summer in the midst of the winter. And then if you look at all the winter concordance, there's a lot of neutral language where he talks about how winter days, he's amusing himself with winter days, and he's able to take a walk and look outside his window at the winter. The winter is described as cold and not so great, obviously. But the way he describes it is that the house provides him a space to be able to appreciate the aesthetic of the winter surrounding him. So that shows you there that the house has a very strong positive connotation with it. So I was able to use both NLTK and Spacey to find some interesting things. I definitely wouldn't have looked at the winter and summer had I not looked through the Spacey tags. Something that I did find a little difficult was that with the concordance feature, you only get so many characters before and after the word. So you would have to spend your time looking through the text physically again, basically redoing the work that this does for you to find more context in the actual reading, which I'm not sure there might be a way to extend this characterization. Okay, so yeah, should I just search these? Okay, so there is a way you can set that. So like had we done that, we would have more, but that's something you gotta look out for, is just making sure you are getting exactly the context that you want.
So I focused on the conclusion, and what's really interesting about it, if you do a visual scan really quickly, it's a bunch of specific locations, which is why I started with using Spacey. Yeah, thank you. So I started with running the GPE, LOC, and FAC commands, and I got 37 GPE, I think 13 LOC, and 1 FAC. So what you can see from the GPE locations is that Thoreau uses a bunch of different locations, from Japan to California to Canada in his conclusion, which I thought was really interesting because his conclusion is mostly about how traveling within yourself, and he uses all of these to talk about how traveling is a luxury, and so it's not using the simplicity that you need to find yourself. So he uses all of these as more negative. as in like he talks about how like California, he doesn't understand the whole like short term, like going and getting gold. He just doesn't get it. Then for LOC, it added a lot, but it really, what surprised me is I didn't talk about Walden Pond so much. So in his conclusion, which I figured he would, it focuses mostly on other places. It also includes the Mungo Park, which is a person and not a park, which is a fault of Spacey. And then also for FAC, it only came up with Sphinx, which has nothing to do with the tag, but that's okay. And you can go to the next one. Thank you. Oh, so what I did with all this information is that I went through the actual text and I highlighted the words that found out using control find. And so for GP tags, I did in yellow, LOC in blue. I didn't highlight the one from this paragraph because there was no FAC. And then if it was missed by Spacey, I highlighted it in red. So what I noticed is that Spacey didn't pick up on a few terms like a Northwest Passage, or it also didn't pick up on, sorry, I don't want to mess it up. It didn't pick up on Tierra del Fuego, which is also a location. And it also didn't pick up, and I don't think it's meant to, but things like continents and the private sea. So there are things I was just missing that I wish I had. So what would have been helpful is if my computer was able to function with NLTK, but it gave me every block and every rejection in the world. So it was really interesting to be able to use this to view how Thoreau was just using these words and using these specific places. And so what it came down to is that it assisted us in recognizing that Thoreau's distaste for luxurious travel, but it only like slightly contributed to helping me read this. So if I decided that I wanted to read carefully, it would have taken a lot more time to find this, but I would have been able to get there. Spacey just made it a lot faster.
One thing that I hope we've demonstrated so far is that it began with a close reading of Walden, and then we asked those questions. We used the digital tools, get the data, but then that data also demanded that we go back and do another close reading. So it's not to say that the digital tools weren't helpful or relevant, but if there's any doubt that doing the digital humanities doesn't help you become a closer reader, I hope it's that to rest a little bit. So some challenges.
Yeah, so we definitely had a few challenges. Everyone who had downloaded all the things had issues using the virtual machine, and so they had to switch from to their local host and download things. They all downloaded things on their actual computer instead of using VirtualBox. Also, Python is really, really sensitive with everything that you're doing with all the specific language. I mean, of course. And then there's the typical time constraints and availability issues involved with being a student. But ultimately, I felt that our project really went everything was pretty smooth. I mean, there were certain things I was having trouble and you were having trouble, but it wasn't really, it was kind of oh, I just did this. And I was oh, okay, cool, I just did this. And then it's oh, we all have all this information, all of a sudden. So yeah, it was pretty successful, I would say. You look like you want to say something.
Just that Melissa was saying that she kept running into errors. We all kept running into errors with Jupyter Notebook trying to do Python commands. But with Dr. Shack and Dr. Kirkham's help, we were able to kind of get past that. And then also the availability issues, I think, were overcome pretty nicely with our Slack and Trello communications. We tried to use those effectively, and you're right. And some of the things kind of figured themselves out because of the way those platforms are meant to kind of smooth conversation, over through digital.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, I feel like it was one of the more smooth group projects that I had been a part of in college. But that's also, I mean, that I feel like mostly they're not very smooth. So maybe that's not saying too much, but no, I think it went pretty well. I mean, we had a few challenges, but yeah. So we're gonna go back to the guiding questions, talk about those a little bit. So the sense of place evolving throughout Walden. Sean was talking about how the village is a place where Thoreau moved through, and we can tell this from the list of most commonly used words in the chapters Sean generated with LLTK, which had a lot of locomotive terms that can indicate movement. So this chapter really discusses the physical progression through a place, but Thoreau also seems to be implying that the physical familiarity of a place allows not only one's body to progress through this place, but the mind as well can progress, which leads to that action of living deliberately. If you're, there's the movement through the place, but with having it be a place that is familiar, which we can tell because of the common nouns used, it allowed for a more dual experience of progressing physically and mentally. With the ponds, in terms of the evolution of the sense of place, this kind of stood out a little bit to me as I was reviewing the data, just because it is more of an analysis of the place rather than a description. And Thoreau, he wants to communicate the glory of Walden Pond in comparison to others, so it does really, he uses place to create an argument more so than anything else. Housewarming, this evolved place through combining physical place with metaphysical space. Like Emma talked about, the house being the physical home, or the physical place, and the home being the metaphysical space. And so his distinction of this just kind of evolved his use of physical location. And in the conclusion, Thoreau continues with this distinction between the physical and the metaphysical. And he develops this concept of metaphysical space by spatializing the exploration of the mind, sort of. So yeah, I'm just going to briefly go through these. So does the language of place change with the use of proper nouns? I thought that this was one of the most relevant questions to what we ended up finding through our data. So the village, Thoreau's use of common names intended to increase the sense of familiarity, as I said before. The village, the woods, which denotes a sense of comfortability and knowingness and home, which kind of, not only showing the I noticed that as showing this interconnection between living beings represented by this universally shared language, but just that familiarity using which can be assessed through the use of common nouns, which leads to the action of living deliberately as it has less distraction. The ponds increase the use of proper nouns, and that led us to viewing this chapter as more analytical and argumentative, which made it definitely stand out. And housewarming, he brings back this language of familiarity, which makes sense if he's talking about the house and the home. And his discussion of the comfort of these areas and how familiarity of physical location, again, allows for greater spatialization of the mind. If that's spatialization, I'm gonna use that because of the lack of distractions in the surrounding area. With this question, I thought the conclusion really wrapped up well. The progression of whatever subliminal argument, whether intentional or unintentional, that Thoreau created through this progression of language. In this chapter, Thoreau's frequent use of familiar language seems to reveal its underlying purpose, but his frequent use of familiar language seems to reveal his underlying purpose within this chapter as he elaborates on his distaste for worldly travel. Thoreau views, as Moses said, the majority of these foreign locations as distractions from the goal of simplicity. So whether intentional or not, it seems that there's a positive correlation between Thoreau's use of terminology expressing familiarity with the common nouns and his fondness towards a place. Furthermore, the place he is fond of are places that promote the action of living deliberately. It seems that Thoreau considered spatial familiarity as superior to spatial unfamiliarity, as the former is conducive to living a deliberate lifestyle. So I saw this chapter not only as concluding the story, but also subliminally concluding the argument that was developed throughout the chapters, at least that we analyzed. And then briefly, the last three questions: digital tools, can they be used to better reflect this sense of place? For some chapters, yes, and for other chapters, no. And I think it definitely depends on whether you're using NLTK or Spacey or whatever. And it was just, some people, like Sean found that NLTK was better, Cal found that Spacey worked better. Spacey wasn't that great for you. It just depended on a lot of stuff. So benefits to making this a digital project, it definitely allowed everything that we did to be super efficient. And I can't even imagine trying to do this. It would have taken months to try to do this by hand. And also being able to identify Thoreau's use of language that we may not have been able to do without these tools. I've read this book like a million times, and I have never thought about Thoreau's differentiation of proper and common nouns and what that differentiation does to the reading process. But since doing this, going back and reading definitely makes me appreciate more whatever Thoreau is intentionally or unintentionally doing subliminally with his use of common and proper nouns, and how that, even to the reader, if it's subconscious, that kind of communicates this message of familiarity being conducive to living deliberately. So is it appropriate to think of this work as in line with Thoreau's ethos of living deliberately? That is not, that's something that we started with, but that is not a question that can be concluded from this project. That is a question that is independent in itself. That needs, I don't even know what that needs, but that, that just, I tried to consider that the whole time while looking through everything, and that's a lot. And, it begs the question of what if Thoreau existed during the digital age? Perhaps I don't really see him as, if someone presented a computer to him in 1854, I feel like he would have been, this is wrong, this is distracting and whatever. But if he lived in the digital age, would that change his opinion? I don't know. So that's it. So yeah, I found that this was, definitely opened my eyes to a lot of different kinds of reading of Walden that I hadn't done before. And if I can appreciate it a little bit more, that's a big thing, because I very much did not appreciate it at all. So yeah.
Just a couple minutes of question. I know people have to get to other exams, but
Is NLTK, is that a Python package, or what is that exactly?
You would, yes, sort of.
it's go to nltk.org. And it's, natural language toolkit. Yes, it's I guess a Python library.
Right, so there are terms that you can, by running Python commands on a text, it'll go back to NLTK and find those terms.
Any questions or comments? To move along. Well, thank you guys. This was really wonderful, and I think was the perfect one to end with. So you guys were right to ask to be the last presentation. Really, you brought a bunch of themes together from across the presentations and across the semester. I want to say to you all again what great experience this has been for me. I We're now to all digital humanists now, whether you like it or not. Stay in touch with me. Think about doing digital projects in other classes, and don't hesitate to get in touch with me for assistance with them. Come talk to me if you want to learn how to set up a terminal on your own computer. If you're going to get rid of the virtual box, you may want to do because it takes up so much space on the machine. But you can run a terminal on your own computer and do a lot of the things that we've done this semester in VirtualBox. And finally, back up your computer all the time. It's the most important rule, so you don't lose stuff. Have a great summer. I've been sending you feedback on your journals and ebooks. I haven't gotten to everybody's yet, but I'll continue to do that. I'll send you feedback on your presentations. That stuff will come quickly. If you have any questions about any of it, you know where to find me. Good luck with all the rest of your exams, and you can have a great summer. See you around. I saw that, yes. In fact, there are a few people in the classroom who have yeah. Good.
Okay.